So, beautiful day. This beautiful morning to gather for worship, to celebrate the presence of God in our lives. And Easter morning reveals the power of God's love for each of us. And it's a holy day for Christians throughout the world. Because central to our faith is that Jesus was crucified, and on the third day, God raised him from the dead. Central to our faith is the declaration that love is stronger than the powers and principalities of our world. God's love is mightier than death. And Easter reminds us that nothing in all of creation can ever separate us. So that's why we come together to celebrate the power of the resurrection, the power of God's love for us and for all. So we heard the story again about how Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb when it's still dark, sunrise service, it's still dark, but she goes to the tomb and she finds the stone has been removed. She runs and locates the disciples, tells them that they had taken the Lord out of the tomb and they don't know where they laid him. We know that there's a race between Peter and the one that Jesus loved back to the tomb. We know that the grave clothes are discovered and described in detail. We know the disciples leave, and we know that Mary's left alone. And she is filled with sorrow. And she is asked, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she says, "Because they've taken the Lord away, and I don't know where they laid him." And the risen Lord asks her, "Whom are you looking for?" Now, to Mary's way of thinking, Jesus is dead. His dead body is all that remains of his presence to her and to the world. And she persists in locating so that she may take him away. But in a single word, in her name, Mary, she finds her sorrow dispelled, her vision transformed, her life graced with new possibilities. Now, it's interesting to note that when Jesus first speaks to Mary, he says, "Woman," and she doesn't recognize him. She's looking for a body, not a living presence. She doesn't expect Jesus to be alive. Mary has searched intently for his body. She's consulted the disciples, chatted with angels, conversed with the supposed gardener. She even sees Jesus, and yet she doesn't recognize him. But when Jesus calls her by name, and not just by woman, Mary, instantly she recognizes him and reacts with such deep joy. Rabboni is a form of endearment which implied an affection is present. It is a sweet moment. And Mary says, "I've seen the Lord." Now we know in the biblical world, a good name meant more than a good reputation because it always identifies some character in the person. Every name has a meaning. So your name matters. Knowing the names of other people matter. So I recently was at a meeting. It was long and tedious. Okay, it was boring. But as it was about to conclude, we were invited to come forward and receive a blessing. So there was a number of folks set up throughout the room, and I got in line, and I just waited my turn. And as it so happened, the person giving the blessing was a famous preacher, known throughout the mainline world. Not as famous as Joel Osteen or Franklin Graham or Bishop Michael Curry, but he was famous. And there I stood, face to face with a famous person. And then the great one said in his godlike voice, "Bruce, receive the blessing and remember who you are." and to whom you belong. Then he put the oil on my forehead. What a meaningful moment. And as I made my way back to the seat, all puffed up, of course, because I did recall a couple occasions where we had met. Okay, we were introduced. And I have to admit, what I really was thinking was, he remembered my name. So I sat down. Karen nudged me and smiled and said, "What's going on?" I leaned over and said to her, "He knows who I am. He knows my name." Then she started chuckling. Actually, she was laughing by then out loud, and she pointed, and suddenly I realized that I had a stinking "Hello, my name, Bruce" name tag on. Okay, not exactly a merry moment, but sometimes you do want to go where somebody knows your name. And they're always glad you came. So when you call somebody by their name, you are declaring that they are important to you and that you value and respect them. And I want you to hear this. The risen Christ knows you, not from a distance, not from a tip of the glass kind of across the room kind of knowing. We have the deepest connection available to us with the risen one who chooses to be for us. We are surrounded in God's presence. Right here, right now, today, God calls you by name. And I believe that if we are open and quiet and listening, we will hear Christ call us by name. I believe that if we just sit down and sit in the sacredness of the moment, we will experience God's redeeming presence. And I can assure you that you are known by the risen one who calls you by name. Now, I'm going to ask you, oh man, I got another hour. I'm going to invite you to do something for me right now. I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to tell them your name. Go ahead. Okay, do the person behind you. Go behind you. You see, because when we know each other's names, community can be built. We can grow into cultures of care and compassion when we know each other's name. And so, as you go about this journey, this Easter day, this Easter week, wherever the journey takes you, wherever the journey takes you, remember that you are known, that the risen one loves you. The risen one knows your name. Thanks be to God.